So we'll start off with a talk. Today's talk is the remedies for the 3 deadly sins of karma. And the interesting thing about this is when I wrote some of my first books in the late 90s, they were all about health and healing, because I had the sense, well, not the sense, the reality, that medicine had lost the way and they'd lost all the principles of what really it takes to heal. And I went back to ancient wisdom, and especially indigenous wisdom, to some of these principles. So those are the kind of things you would probably read on the old website with those books. What's happening now is that this is more about transcendence and transformation, because the same principles, and I knew that when I wrote the book, the same principles for spirituality are those for health, healing, and wellness, and even curing. So, but now we're shifting away from the health and healing stuff, although I will mention it every now and then when I think of something interesting. Next week, we'll maybe focus a little bit more on the healing side of the transcendence and transformation. But in reality, you cannot separate the one from the other. And you don't have to be cured to be healed. So the hexagon, those of you who have come to talks before realize is a very, very important symbol. You can see it in nature. Maybe it doesn't have the angles, but it's there. And it's basically the symbol for the heart chakra of the yoga chakra system. Just very briefly, there's 7 chakras, energy centers in the body. And there are thousands of energy channels, but there are 3 main ones that you'll see coursing up and down the spine: the sun and the moon channel and the central channel. And the moon is the cool, contracting force, and the sun is the hot, expansive force, very much similar to the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous systems. They do the same thing. And if we can balance these 2 forces, we can get energy to go up the central channel and balance the chakras, and in that way attain equanimity, wholeness, healing, transformance, transcendence, whatever you want to call it. So we're going to look at this symbol because it's a powerful symbol, and it makes it easy to remember some of these principles. This is from a yogi. He said, to know the real self to be one's own is the greatest attainment. To know wrongly the non-self, such as the ego, to be the self, is no attainment at all. One should therefore renounce or denounce this perception of taking the non-self, the little self, for the self. So in other words, ego versus soul. And you know, we're under continual barrage of what's called, I guess, the hypnosis of materialism, what the yogis and the Buddhists call samsara. You know, Apple just brought out their new iPhone and their new iWatch, and this has become the new golden calf, you know, that the Israelites worshipped at the base of Mount Sinai. And we're going to talk a bit more about that next time. But there's so many trappings out there. This might sound a simple thing, but it's really quite difficult to adhere to because there's a lot out there to tempt us. So I kind of, when I thought of the heart chakra and the hexagon, I realized that there were 3 points pointing upwards towards light and 3 points pointing downwards towards the lower chakras. The lower chakras are survival chakras: ego, survival, flight or fight, reproduction of the species, and so on. They're really important chakras. We don't want to get rid of them. They're really vital. But the upper chakras, those principles, truth, awareness, and being in the present moment, are key to managing the upper chakras. Whereas desirous attachment, ego, or what the Buddhists might call self-cherishing, and judgment are the impediments. So we're going to talk about both the enemy, although they're not really the enemy because they've served us well. We wouldn't be on this this audience if we didn't have a strong sense of ego, and we had ability to judge, and we had some desire. Nothing wrong with desire. And love and empathy or compassion embrace all these factors. Now, there's some work to show that love, empathy, compassion actually increase your immune system. So love is a healthful thing. Cynicism depresses the immune system. So there are some reasons why we want to do these things besides transcendence. So if we look at the chakras here, we'll see that up here, by the 6th and the 7th chakras, we have awareness and truth quite high up here. Here we have compassion, forgiveness at the heart chakra, which involves love. Here's the diaphragm representing prana, the breath. And down below we have ego, 3rd chakra, the way we make our way in the world. And it's really around this chakra that desirous attachment and judgment occur. So we need to move the energy above the diaphragm into this chakra, and this is the gateway to the higher chakras. Even the Bushmen say that you have to open the heart if you want to be a good healer. You have to love everybody, no matter what you think about them. Not always easy to do. So now we look at the tree of life, and I wanted to just make some points here. It's very similar in some respects, but it's a bit more sophisticated and involved. On this side we have the expanding forces, sometimes called the king, expansive. This side we have restraint, rigor, contraction, sometimes called the queen. And we have 10 of these sphirot, which are kind of energy centers, very much the same as the chakras, really. This one, faith, which is called da'at, is not an energy center. It's just an extra, which is really key. And we're going to focus quite a lot on this one in 2 weeks' time. This faith is the gateway to Kete and the Godhead, really. So here we have what they call the 5 loves, which is the crown, wisdom, mercy, non-attachment, and in the center here, love and beauty. Here we have what's called the 5 judgments or strengths: understanding, judgment, attachment, ego, and earth kingdom, which is really the elements. And there are 22 pathways linking all these energy centers together. So all of them have a shadow. If you have too much wisdom, we will talk more about this, and so much so that your brains fell out and you're not grounded, that's not a good thing. If you have too much understanding and you completely hung up on data, well, that's not a good thing. So all these pathways represent ways to balance these, because they're all interconnected. Even the higher ones are interconnected with the lower ones, and they hitch up together. This chakra, this sifra, which is called Netzach, I don't know much about it, but the one thing I do know, it represents non-attachment. And here, Hod represents attachment. And this should be non-attachment to the material, but it's good to be attached to the spiritual. So it's not an absolute. And this is really attachment, which is a good thing, because you want to be attached to some things and not to others. So it's quite a difficult, complex business to negotiate this whole thing. And the way in the middle is the middle way. It's kind of like the central channel of the yoga system. You have to find the middle way. This represents will, intention. This holds the balance between the two, what the Buddha would have called the middle way. So it's quite a complex system, really, and we're going to talk a little bit more about it and much more about it next time. So if we look at awareness, we see here that it's interesting that we have this sephirah, which is wisdom. The element is water. Water is flowing, it's undifferentiated, and the thought here is undifferentiated, non-verbal thought. It's connecting more to spacious mind, what we talked about a few weeks ago, big mind, Buddha mind, or what Patanjali called the intellectual sheath, not so much our monkey mind. So this is kind of, if you take Einstein as the archetype, Einstein said that the gift of fantasy meant more to him than his power for cognitive knowledge. Fantasy, imagination. Next year we're going to be actually doing a talk on imagination. So this is fantasy, imagination. This is, if you like, Steve Jobs' visionary thing. And this, if you like, is the new Apple, which is all about getting us to buy new stuff. Different sort of sensation. This is understanding, and the element is fire, and this is red in color. And this represents verbal thought, visual thought, the kind of thing that we really habituated to with our educational system. This is where we spend 90% of our time, very little in this time. In fact, imagination is sort of thought to be something that's not very constructive. This really links more with narrow mind, the monkey mind, the lower mind, if you like, or what Patanjali called the mind sheath. And then, of course, all the other chakra, all the other sphirot are linking together. Now, this one here is just elaborating somewhat, because we're going to be talking about truth, which is up here with awareness, and the opposite, denial of truth, which might be data. Data can only take us so far. Einstein said, not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts. We are hung up on data and cognitive understanding. Can't take us everywhere. And here we have this triad, which is mercy, beauty, and love, and judgment, which form a triad. And this is love, empathy, and forgiveness, good for the immune system. This is fear, the only two emotions really, love and fear. And guilt comes the opposite of forgiveness. Shame and guilt actually increase pro-inflammatory factors, which can create certain cancers, autoimmune diseases, increase heart disease, increase atherosclerosis. Compassion increases your immune system. So it's kind of an interesting thing that this has a lot to do with healing as well. You can see that too much mercy without judgment is no good, and 100% judgment without mercy is not going to be good either. We see both of those in our current culture. Depending on how we balance these, we're going to have a different choice, a different action. And if we stay in the middle and we have a spiritual practice, we'll make skillful choices. Otherwise, it's going to be hard. So we'll go now with the sayings. Remember now that the sayings that you see that are in regular type, that don't have quotes, are usually from the ancestors, or it's at least my interpretation of what I think they are. Also recognize that I'm pretty limited in what my understandings are, so you may have very different understandings of what they're saying, and don't take my word as the gospel. If you have another sense of the saying, you may well be right. I think we're right for ourselves and where we are on the hierarchy of this whole system. But this is what they say. You are not challenged about behavior or tested for correctness of answers. You are questioned only about choices. Behavior reflects ego or the lack of ego, the little self. Answers reflect knowledge or knowing, the opposite. In other words, understanding versus wisdom. Choices reflect love or fear. The right or wrong, good or bad, better or best about choices are measured only by your own heart, your own conscience. Now, some time ago, a Celtic Druid ancestor came with these words in the dream time, and I couldn't kind of figure them out, But these are the words. We're going to play a song and we're going to do a meditation. But the words were fire of warmth, of transformation, light of inspiration, be in this flame and burn within. And if you think about it, that's absolutely 100% like the sephirah of understanding that we had on the left side. This is understanding. It's transformative, it's inspirational, it's like fire, and it should burn within us. The ancestors also say, with all your strength, get knowledge, but don't be a slave to data. Then the next verse, which I never really understood, I'm not sure I understand them now, but I understand them a little better in the light of the tree of life. The Celts, of course, also had a tree of life. It's not just a Kabbalistic thing. Waters of wisdom, waters of love. Remember, 80% of our body is water. So the vibration in the water in your body is extremely important, because we're going to be talking a lot about vibration, because it's hard to understand this stuff unless you're thinking about one's own vibration. How high is it? How low is it? Waters of love, grace of life. We saw that grace is dart. It's right at the top, in between wisdom and understanding. Very powerful, not a sephirah, but very, very powerful. Faith can get you into the Godhead very easily. That's why I think Jesus said the meek will inherit the earth. You don't have to be able to read or write to get to the other side and be in the causal realm. So waters of love, grace of life, be present here and flow within. So I thought we'd start off with a meditation. Don't worry about the words. As I say, they'll be there on the website for you if you really like them. They are beautiful words. And my understanding of it is that the water is the wisdom sephirah, and the fire is the understanding sephirah, and we need to balance them both. I want to talk about this Haggah. This is a Kabbalistic form of meditation, which is kind of unique. Haggah is not an emptying of the mind kind of meditation. It is rather to ponder, reflect, and focus until one is lost in the thought of imagining or sensing, until one becomes one with it. It is not always silent and can be assisted by sharing of words for meaning, poetry, or whatever, sounds such as music or gongs or any other sensory experience of touch, feel, and smell, incense. So, if it would work, I would have sage burning here as well. So this is a powerful form of meditation, quite different to the sensory withdrawal and the calming of the mind, which we so much associated with wisdom and getting into the water flow. So this is another way of getting into the flow of that sephirah. So I'm going to play the song and just get you through a little guided meditation so you can relax. So sit up straight with your hands nice and relaxed. And relax your face. Relax your neck. Let all those facial muscles unwind from the week. Take some deep breaths in and out. Relax your shoulders. Relax anything that's tense. If you like, you can breathe in white light and breathe out thick black smoke. Breathe in what you want to bring in and breathe out what you want to leave away from the week or from your life or whatever. And then just see where the music takes you. It's a few minutes and then we'll go on with the talk.
Inspiration, be in this flame, fire of warmth, of transformation, light of inspiration, be in this flame, be in this flame. Be in this flame, be in this flame, be in this flame, and burn within, and burn within, and burn within, and burn within. Waters of wisdom, waters of love, grace of life, be present here. Waters of wisdom, waters of love, grace of life. Be present here. 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 And flow within. And flow within. And flow within, and flow within, and flow within. waters of wisdom, waters of love, grace of life, be present here. Waters of wisdom, waters of love, grace of life, grace of life, be present here, be present here, be present here, be present here. Be present here and flow within, and flow within, and flow within, and flow within, and flow within.
And when you're ready, you can slowly open your eyes. Move about a little bit. So we're going to talk about love. So love in the center of the hexagon, and again, this very key chakra. It's actually also seen sometimes in some scriptures as the center of the tree of life. The center of that beauty, which is called Tiferet, Sephirah. And love is really key to the placebo response. The doctor-patient relationship at its best, or the shaman-healer relationship at its best, the healing is about love. Placebo is the ability of belief in something, doesn't matter what, to cure, heal, touch somebody in a deep way. The opposite is nocebo, which is the ability of fear to hurt, harm, or even kill somebody, such as sorcery, witchcraft, and things like that, negative aspects. So there's the flip side of everything. This is Desjardins, who said, love is the most universal and formidable and mysterious of all the cosmic forces. And there's another saying that says, only love can generate the healing fire. At the end of the day, when a healer is transmitting healing, essentially they're getting out of the way and they're transmitting universal healing energy, which is just God's love in disguise, or whatever you want to call it. You don't like the concept of God, call it the force or the field or the Tao or whatever is comfortable to you. So love implies generosity. This is Krishnamurti. Care, not to hurt another, not to make them feel guilty. As we'll see more and more, guilt is a terrible, unhealthful thing. To be generous, courteous, and behave in such a manner that your words and thoughts are born out of compassion. Now this is an interesting one. Love is a decision first of wisdom, then of courage, and follows with emotion or feeling. It is a devotion, sometimes of joy, sometimes of duty. It's more like in sickness and in health, that type of thing. So in reality, I think we've been deluded by the Hollywood principle, what Robert Johnson called romantic love. I'm sure some of you have read his books, He, She, and We. The concept of romantic love, which is what we do, is we usually find a partner and there's chemistry. And they say you can't mess with chemistry, but chemistry can mess with you. So chemistry messes with you, and there's a guy called, I'm trying to remember his name, but he's a marriage counsel fellow, and he said that the person we usually end up with is the person who we're chemically attracted to through our primitive brain, through the monkey mind, and it's usually the person who's the least able to fulfill the requirements that you never got when you were a child. But what we do is we project our own needs onto this person, and we're sure they're the right one, but at the end of a year we realize that none of these needs are getting met, just like maybe they weren't getting met with our parents or our loved ones when we grew up. So then we dump them and we move on. Unless the sex is really good, then it lasts more than a year. But that's kind of the way things go. And I was watching a movie the other night, and it was called Outsourcing. It's about this American who goes to India to teach the Indians how to sell Americans their goods. And he has this Indian woman he's talking to who has this arranged marriage. And he's appalled. He said, I just can't believe it, that you could actually abide such a terrible institution. And she says to him, you should talk. You have a 50% divorce rate in your country. So we know where the so-called, if you want to say, Hollywood archetype is going to usually lend us. So this makes a lot of sense. Love is a decision, first of wisdom, then of courage, and follows with emotion. So a lot of these folks who have arranged marriages where the parent is really concerned about the child and knows the child well and knows who's in the community, and they pick somebody, it might actually be the right choice, because if it follows these caveats, it might work out quite well. I'm not sure what the divorce rate is with the old system. It's probably the same as ours now, because they're following us. If the law does not serve love, do not serve the law. Unfortunately, we are inundated with laws that don't serve love. Now, we can't disobey them, because there's no point in landing up in prison. But we can talk against them. We don't have to serve them emotionally. There's another saying, God is not a test of love. God's love is not a test. So these two go together. We have to try and recognize the difference between what is right and what might be the law, or what is moral and what is actually not, is quite reprehensible. Among all who possess great wisdom, only those act wisely who act from love. The early sages taught that the pursuit of wisdom ennobled the intellect with knowledge of God. So we need that, the understanding. We need wisdom, the wisdom of scriptures. We need to have knowledge of God, but only love brings God into your presence. Now, this is why you find sometimes these amazing healers who heal, and they just seem to be empty channels to channel that love. If you look at the Sufi poets like Hafiz, you read their poetry. At first, when I read it, I thought this guy had an amazing relationship with some woman he was crazy in love with. But he's writing about God, kind of like David in the Psalms. So when you have the sense of love, not only for your fellow, but for the Great Spirit as well, you actually are brought into the presence. Hence, they don't play favorites up there. You don't have to be knowledgeable to get there. In fact, knowledge can trip you up. So it's all about love at the end of the day. And I must say, I've spent a lot of time reading scriptures and so on. I've never really found such an emphasis on love that we're going to talk about today. Another one, if study and prayer do not serve justice and compassion, love, they are but a conceit and a hollow sound. Transformation happens from how lovingly one attends, not from the attention itself. No matter how successful the outcome, nor how accomplished and skillful one becomes, no matter the satisfaction and rewards, fulfillment resides only in love. God doesn't care about results, only about the attention and intention and the passion of your effort. That's really what it's about. And if there's compassion and empathy, and you're doing service and you're giving other people joy, that's what counts. The rational mind, that's understanding, gets in the way of what the heart must embrace in order to coax the soul to open. Heart and soul are interconnected. Do not be led except by the heart. Do not trust except with the heart. Do not seek except for the heart's sake. Pray to see with the eyes of the heart, to know the heart's wisdom, and to act with love. And the other song we're going to do at the end is, there's some words which really are, the mind controls the heart. And that's the sad set of circumstances, is that's usually what happens, and that's what happens in romantic love as well. We're doing calculations about the person rather than coming from another sense of being. So we have to get the mind out of the way of the heart. Last time when we talked about Patanjali's sheaths, we talked about spacious or big mind, or the intellectual sheath, monkey mind or narrow mind, or the mind sheath, and ego. And we said they were all three of them, as according to Patanjali, were in flux all the time. And to the extent that spacious or big mind overcame the other two, we were going to be more likely to head to the causal, to the place of bliss or ananda in the yoga scriptures. But Patanjali, I'm sure, knew this, but he didn't put love into the equation. So I'm just going to modify it a bit and put in monkey mind and ego and big mind, but big mind and heart and love is the way to the self, way to the higher self, way to the soul, the Buddha self, the Christ consciousness, whatever you want to call it. Can't get away from it. Again, it's a vibrational thing. You can't pretend it. It has to be real. God is a persistent lover, wooing us with many pleasures, lavishing endless grace, wanting our delight, hoping for our trust. Well, the ancestors have said that God actually wants a personal relationship with each one of us. I never could buy into this. I actually never thought about it. But when I first got initiated in South Africa, I was very comfortable with the idea that the ancestors were the intermediaries between me and us and God, because God was too remote. But that's not true. And the Sufi poets, I think, have shown that that's not true. God wants to be loved. The way is not to God, but with God. And that's the way we can hear the soft, silent voice of God. And whoever that fellow was who wrote Conversations with God, I used to think that was a bit silly, but now I realize that maybe, he was in a way connecting with the God force. The very powerful Bushman healers that go into a trance and go to the other side actually say, we see the Great Spirit, we make ourselves very small. Forgiveness is the most completing gift we can experience, for we all have its sweet need. This is John O'Donoghue. And we have to forgive ourselves as well as others. Without that, we can't heal, we can't transcend, we can't transform, we're going to be stuck. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the opposite, which is shame and self-recrimination, self-condemnation. The most completing gift we can experience, we all have its sweet need. Now, in African tradition and the work that I do, I would say that most of the work I do is around forgiveness. I see a lot of patients who have, or clients who have, shades around them, intrusive spirits, which are usually the spirits of their ancestors who are hanging around the living asking for forgiveness because they've done something terrible to them. And sometimes they hang around not the one they've maybe given the problem to, but maybe somebody else that they can then contact and say, hey, your grandfather wants to talk to you. He really is looking for your forgiveness. Because if they don't get forgiven, they are karmically bound to repeat that whole thing all over again. It's a terrible thought. So by forgiving somebody, we release them from that karmic blemish. And by doing that, we also bump up our karmic brownie points, because forgiveness is very, very healthful, as well as good for transformation and transcendence. The worship most pleasing to God is service to others. So if you're having trouble with getting to that love vibration, I think I struggle a lot with that. Service-oriented, what they would call karma yoga. There's different forms of yoga. I like the karma one. Do service. The Mother Teresa archetype. Albert Schweitzer says, I don't know what your destiny will be, but the one thing I do know, the only ones among you who will be really happy are those who have found and sought how to serve. So service is good because it makes us happy if we get out of the way of ourselves, and it makes other people happy, and it makes the Great Spirit happy. Now we did a whole thing on the present moment, so I'm not going to repeat the talk, but I just wanted to emphasize a few things and talk about a few things that I didn't talk about last time, just to highlight it, because without awareness, truth, and especially the present moment, we're all going to be lost. Unless we have a dedicated spiritual practice that we do at least 20 minutes a day, almost every day, that's enjoyable and reproducible and sustainable, we are not going to get into this vibration. It's as simple as that. You can't think it. You can study all you want, but you'll never think your way into it. It's a vibrational thing. So this is the ancestor. Sacred mystery is to be experienced, not to be deciphered. To be entered, not to be decoded. This is the thing, those of us that are nature lovers, we can go into nature and be in awe, but you don't have to backpack through the Alaskan wilderness. You can see it in a spider's web or looking at a flower in your garden. It's called magic of the ordinary. Sacred mystery is a form of practice, So walk on the beach or go into a park and experience that for yourself, and you don't have to get overwhelmed with a huge archetype of the Garden of Eden, which is God's masterpiece, which we do have in our country, our back country, and even the fore country. This is Einstein. The most beautiful and powerful and profound emotion we can experience is the sensation of the mystical. Einstein was a true mystic. It is the sower of all true science. In this emotion you dwell in wonder and stand wrapped in awe. He said, I want to understand the mind of God. That's what got him going. He also said that our knowledge is the knowledge of children. We'll know a little more than we know now, but the real nature of things we'll never know, never. But he was inspired to do this, and if you look at Maslow and Maslow's peak experiences, you'll see that one of the causes of a peak experience is unraveling a sacred mystery or just some scientific discovery. You can get into a rapturous state that we talked about, where the knower, the known, and the process of knowing fuse into one thing, what's called unity consciousness or the oneness experience. There are lots of other things that do it, labor, sex, drumming, dancing, song where you kind of become the music. But experiencing the mystical in the magic of the ordinary, we can all do. The fundamental notion of equilibrating the opposites is omnipresent in all beliefs. This universal truth is crucial to our understanding of how we heal, transform, and transcend. We have to find that middle way, and the only way to do that is with a spiritual practice. You can mix it up. You don't have to confine yourself to one thing. I do yoga and I hike, and sometimes I do something else. Because the Western mind gets very bored with the same repetitive thing. So just do something that works for you. Don't come to the end of somebody else's spiritual practice. Now, this is very much a huge emphasis from the ancestors because it sort of diverges a little bit from what we know from yoga and Buddhism. From my flesh shall I behold God. The route to God is through our senses. So they're very much in tune with this idea of imagination, of a sensory meditation, which we did today, as another way into that realm. Africans say we pray by singing and dancing. I've been practicing yoga for 25 years, and when I was doing my initiation, I did an hour's yoga every morning. But it never got me as far as the drumming and the dancing did. So there is something more to incorporating your spiritual practice into your body. And sometimes I throw bones for people who have profound spiritual practices, and the ancestors say, we're not happy with your spiritual practice. And it might be but because they haven't incorporated into their body, so it's not really working that well for them. Or alternatively, that they need an ancestral practice, because when you look at what they're doing, you think, wow, how come they're not happy with it? There are many forms of transformation, just as there are many sacred prayers and holy paths. You are to find the one for you. Kind of like the three bears, you go and the one bed's too hard and the other bed's too soft, and then you find just the right bed, and then you might grow out of that bed. It gets too small for you, and then you find another one. It's just a tool. That's what I like about the Eastern traditions, is they just look at their knowledge as a tool to help you along the road. They don't want you to believe in Buddhism or be a yogi. They just want to give you a tool. It's kind of like a horse to get you to the right destination. So find out your own spiritual practice. Go to other people, see what they're doing, take what you like, leave the rest. Don't keep persisting with something that doesn't work for you. I did that quite a lot early on. God's breath is heard in quietness and felt in stillness. Beware the noises and clamor of ego which drown out the divine whisper. It's said that we can all hear the soft, silent voice of God. And Kierkegaard said, a hint is a message from God. One must follow it. So sometimes, you're walking on the beach and some thought comes to you. You don't know where that came from. But go to your altar and say thank you, because sometimes it can be life-changing. Or you're doing yoga and you're in Shavasana and something comes to you. It may be from an ancestor. It may be you're hearing the soft, silent, still voice of God. It doesn't really matter as long as you match it with some gratitude. Always gratitude is the ultimate form of prayer. Now, I plug for the ancestral practice, because I didn't talk about this last time. You need an altar, which is called a container, through which you can communicate with the ancestors. It's much more easy to communicate through a container with the spirit world, whether it's a candle or an incense or a prayer or a medicinal plant. It makes it empowered. I don't know why that is, but that's the way it works. The altar is a place to express gratitude and receive from your ancestors. Ask for things, because free will is the cosmic law. You have to ask to receive. You don't ask, you can't receive. You can't ask things like, what will I do with my life? I don't know what to do because of free will. But you can ask, how does it look for me to go on this trip to Peru? And ask for a dream or ask for an intuition if you're not a dreamer, and you might be surprised. So put things, all the ancestors, they don't have to be bloodroot ancestors, inspirational characters, anybody that you loved or might have loved you. Often they're grandparents that love you from the other side, even though you never knew them on this side. Or you might have an exotic Tibetan ancestor that you don't know about who was your lover in a previous life. Love is the juice, love is the grease. So they don't have to be ancestors from this time. They can be from previous times. If you have them from this time and you were very fond of them, put a ring on the altar, put any little artifacts that you have of theirs, it'll magnify it. Wear them if you want to connect more. If you have a walking stick, take it with you when you go hiking. That'll make it better. Get a dream journal if you don't have one and log in your dreams. And then if you have a good dream, go and say thank you. Light a candle, light incense, put a little gift there if you went for a hike. They can't, they can't talk to you like we're talking to each other now, but they still appreciate the sentiments. In fact, they're actually more sensitive when they go to the other side. So they appreciate even more the love connection, and they disappreciate the opposite. They can get quite angry about it. So, the other thing is find out which way you get information. Are you clairvoyant? Are you clairaudient? Are you clairsentient? Some of us just feel things. Where do you feel it? Where do you sense it? What does it tell you? Some people just read other people. Essentially, the ancestors will find the mode of communication that they know works for you because they're not localized in space and time. They know who you are. They have access to your karmic life book. So they know if you're clairsentient. So there's no point in trying to go to meditations and be clairvoyant. It's not going to happen. I tried that for quite a few years. I thought, well, there's no way I can do any of this stuff. I nearly gave it up. I had to find the way that I could communicate in my own way with the ancestors, which might be very different to somebody else. Frequently, the ancestors copy and paste things into your dream time and into your wake time. So they can be saying to you, because they can't communicate, do this, do this, do this. And then suddenly you say, I know what I'm going to do. And you think, wow, I'm a genius. But meanwhile, they're working their butts off to try and get the message through to you. Some of us are nature-bound people. So, we see animals in nature and they come as messages, as the symbol of what they represent might be an endorsement or a warning. For instance, maybe a king snake is an endorsement and a rattlesnake would be a warning, important information. Or you might see some very nondescript animal behaving in a certain way, and the ancestors copy and paste into your head, hey, this is what you need to understand from this animal. And then suddenly you come away with a message from something that was really seemed like nothing. You've got to be in wilderness or nature a long time for that to happen, usually about 5 days. But then you'll start to hear animals talking to you in different ways, maybe through your ancestors. And then also evaluate the measure of your practice. Does it bring you gratitude? Does it bring you joy? Does it bring you more meaning? Does it make you surrender more? Does it bring you more love? If not, then mix it up with something else. Don't abandon what's working okay, but just add something else to it. So let's talk a little bit about truth. Well, truth is in the present moment. And the opposite can also be true. I learned that with indigenous people. They have no trouble with paradox. Today, this can be true, and tomorrow, the opposite can be true. And you're like looking, but that wasn't the same thing yesterday. And they'll say, well, that was yesterday. This is today. So truth is in the present moment. Here's the ancestors. Truth is ego clinging to its own image. I thought, wow, that's a bit strong, like in self-righteous justification. It definitely can be that, but I was thinking, surely there are other truths that don't cling to your ego. The only real truth, and this is the ringer, the only real truth is God's love for us. This is what it is to heal, be healed, surrender to this. So, there's another saying, I can't quote it well. What are you interested in, being right or understanding somebody? Being loved or being loving? If you want the one, you won't get the other. If you have the other, you'll get both of them. So try and, look to the fact that this is the universal thing. God is love, and that's what we experience when we go to the other side. People have near-death experiences. They go through this tunnel and they break into this light, which feels like an overwhelming feeling like they'll describe it as being in the presence of God's love, and they don't want to come back because it's so overwhelming. So that's our birthright. We can get that. That's what the Sufi poets are getting to. But then this is a big step to try and reach this level. Accept the truth from whatever source it comes. I've sometimes heard very great wisdom from a hobo who says something to me in the street, who probably is psychic and he knows what I need to hear at the time. It's not always what I want to hear. He's like telling me, you're a real asshole, you know. And I'm saying, well, he's right, you know, this guy's sitting on the... so take the truth from whatever source it comes. It might be from the opposite, you know, political party. It might be from your enemy. It doesn't matter. Truth is truth, wherever it comes from. And then there's this idea of congruence. Be true to yourself. I implore you to submit to your own myths. Any postponement in doing so is a lie. You've got to be congruent with who you are. We each have a particular essence that nobody else has. We're here to express that on the planet. We're here to heal the planet, to help. And this is what we have to find. It's no use coming to the end of somebody else's life. Your mother's life, your father's life, you know, your group life. You know, you've got to march to the sound of your own drum. It's not always easy, but if you don't, you're going to, you know, we're all going to have regrets at the end of the day. Judgment. Now, the other thing about judgment, you know, we kind of think of judgment, at least I used to, until I was enlightened by the ancestors, as something that's like not politically correct. It's not polite. It doesn't do well in circles, you know. People will go away and say, you know, that Cumes is really judgmental. So we kind of keep quiet, even though we have all these judgments going on in our head. Judgment is a terrible thing for karma and a terrible thing for our vibration. So if you look at it, there's one whole commandment that says, do not covet. Do not covet your neighbor or anything that belongs to your neighbor. So sometimes we judge because somebody's got something we don't have and we would like it. And that's called the evil eye. So we bad vibe them because how come he's got a Mercedes and I'm driving a Volkswagen, you know? Then it goes a bit further, you know, the evil tongue. It's another order of judgment. But these are the worst kinds that I'm talking about, where we slander, we badmouth somebody, we cause somebody terrible harm. We see our political leaders doing it, you know, to each other, so we don't have very good examples to follow. And then finally, there's the so-called evil inclination. These are people who really want to do evil. So in South Africa, they'd go to a witch, you know, and say, hey, that guy's business is doing better than mine. Take him out and then make me prosperous. And they'll do it. It works. Believe me, it works. That's the evil inclination working in conjunction with an evil spirit. Very powerful stuff. Here we go to a bad lawyer and we kind of do something to our neighbor because for some reason we just don't like our neighbor, literally or figuratively. So judgment is a big thing. So this is from a yogi who said self-condemnation, you've seen this one before, strengthens guilt, which is one of the greatest obstacles on the path of realization and of healing. There are a lot of people who feel they do not deserve to be healed. You know, they feel they've sinned for whatever religious or cultural reason. They're not worthy. That's not true ever. You know, God doesn't do that type of stuff. So self-condemnation is a really, really bad thing. We also saw how, when we talked about neuroscience in the present moment, how self-condemnation, recrimination, guilt, shame, puts your brain in lockdown mode. It shuts you off from your higher centers, your frontal lobe, which is your higher notions, your higher concepts, and puts you into your monkey mind, which is your more primitive brain, and locks you out. And it's actually exactly the same as a flight or fight reaction. It makes you freeze, which is another manifestation of the flight or fight reaction. So it's exactly the same as the lion circling your cave, you know, and you don't want to go outside because you're too scared you're going to get eaten. But shame and condemnation do the same thing to us. So it's really important to recognize what's happening when we are shamed. Shame is a terrible thing. That's why it increases pro-inflammatory factors and creates disease. Be patient with yourself, kind to yourself, and above all, release yourself from what you are not accountable. You know, this is very hard for empaths. There are a lot in this audience, I know. And the empath is somebody who's got too loving a heart, and they take responsibility for everything. So somebody is really a bit of a jerk and comes in, you know, lets go and tells them terrible things about what they think about them. And they think to themselves immediately, hey, you know, What did I do to him? There's something I must be responsible for, when really you're not responsible for it. So it's really important to sometimes distinguish what you're responsible for and what you're not. And if you're responsible for it, then take cognizance of it and fix it. But if you're not, then just let it go. I think it happens to all of us to some extent or another. You may have seen this one as well, but it's a good one. Never judge in a condemnatory way. You must support emotionally without condoning. Acknowledge what is wrong so as not to impair conscience. So the whole thing about that is to own up to a problem, but also to be kind to yourself. Treat yourself as you would a good friend. You're not going to go and trash your friend who says to you, hey, I really screwed up with this, I did this. You're not going to say, wow, I can't believe it, I would never have done that. So don't do that to yourself either. Treat yourself kindly, with compassion. Take responsibility for it by condoning it, either in your friend or in maybe one of your loved ones, or condoning it in yourself. You actually compound the problem, and that's not good. So condoning is enabling, and enabling it can be toxic. So you've got to face reality, but do it with compassion. This is Matthew. Judge not that you not be judged, for with what judgment you judge, you shall be judged. With what measure you meet, it shall be measured to you again. He's talking here about karma. When we go to the other side and we reconcile, we will be accountable for this, to what extent we did judge people and maybe harmed them with our judgment, or more importantly, how we harmed ourselves with our judgment, not necessarily somebody else, because they don't even know what we're talking. So this is really a vibrational thing, as are all these deadly sins. If your vibration is wrong, you can't just get into the realms that you need to get into. I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about us. So it's a problem for us, is that sometimes our vibration, as much as we think we're doing well, our vibration is not doing so well. This is from the Talmud. When you talk to people, do not weigh things. A soul that weighs suffers harm. So it's a toxic thing for us. It's not like we're harming somebody else unless we take action. We're really harming our higher self. We're putting ourselves in monkey mind instead of spacious mind. We're closing off our hearts. It's a problem. Whenever you see a worthy person, bless you, a worthy person, endeavor to emulate him or her. When you see an unworthy person, then examine your inner self. So remember the caveat that, if you're pointing a finger at somebody, there's usually 3 pointing back at you. What that usually means also is that we'd be incapable of recognizing a fault in somebody else if it wasn't actually part of our own psyche. So, because if it wasn't, we wouldn't be able to recognize it. So frequently our judgment is imposing our own problems onto somebody else. We project our own difficulties onto somebody else. Sometimes it's almost, we see it amongst people around us, politicians and others as well, where you protest too much. So we have folks who are bashing gays because they're having difficulty coming to grips with their own sexuality. Or we hear one guy who's mounting a whole campaign against prostitution, and meanwhile he's consorting with a prostitute. So when people protest a lot, maybe there's more of a shadow there that's been projected than meets the eye. So really important to not buy into this. This is from Hillel, and it sounds like the Native American thing is walk in somebody else's moccasins. Actions arise from conditions. Do not judge in the former, the action, until the latter, the condition, is well understood. If you have eaten what the judged one has eaten, and worn his clothes, and thought his thoughts, and felt both his joy and pain, then you may say you have stood in his place, but only briefly compared to the length of his stay. So still you may not know the past or present plights that plague him. Our judgments are frequently fraught with error and usually tainted with arrogance. Compassion and love are our salvation and joy. So they're not saying there shouldn't be a reconciliation, retribution, or whatever you want to call it. Somebody screws up, does something really terrible. Doesn't mean to say that he shouldn't be accountable for what he did. But it doesn't have to be about vengeance. It can be about compassion, because we have to think about really what drove this poor guy to do such a thing, And sometimes the worse the crime, the more the pain that the person is suffering. So if we can just shift it around into sort of maybe something of a little bit more compassion, it'll help our vibration. Again, it's about our vibration and not anything else. The fundamental delusion of humanity is to suppose that I am here and you are out there. So, when it comes to spiritual practice, and we're going to talk a bit about the oneness experience, most of the time we're in duality, I'm here, you're there, and there's this duality. But every now and then that dissipates, not often enough. But we have to realize this duality is not what's okay. The ancestors have said we are all the same. We are all one, not the same. We are all one, not the same. We're all unique, but we're all one. See yourself in others, then whom can you hurt? What harm can you do? The yoga saying, namaste, I see the God in you, I see the divine in you. We all have Buddha consciousness. We're all on the same road. Some of us have had more lifetimes than others, but you can be sure that if there's somebody who's doing something that's a little bit unskillful at this time, you've probably done it as well, or I've done it as well, and you can certainly know that in past lives you've done much worse, because we've all in a process of purification. Ubuntu, this is a very common term that's actually disappearing sadly in South Africa. It's a Zulu word that speaks to the essence of being human. This is Bishop Tutu. The solitary individual is, in our understanding, a contradiction in terms. You are a person through other persons. Ubuntu speaks about the importance of communal harmony, warmth, compassion, generosity, hospitality, and seeks to embrace others. Now, when you go into rural Africa, you find happy people who just want to help you, and they'll share their last meal with you. It's just, this is Ubuntu. Now with Western influence, this is kind of disappearing, but you can still find it. You find it especially amongst the Bushmen, because they're living in at least they were, in much more of an indigenous hunter-gatherer lifestyle, because they're used to knowing that we all need each other. We're all in difficulties. We are all in difficulties, so we need to help each other out. This is contrary to the Lone Ranger archetype of the cowboy on his horse, with a gun going into the wild, completely independent, the individual. I often wondered about this. You couldn't do that in Africa. There's just too many things going to eat you or kill you. So you have to bond together, So maybe it was possible. But the Native Americans didn't do that either. It was more us that did it when we came. You think of the Paul Simon song, I'm a rock, I'm an island. That's antithetical to any of this work. We need sangers, we need community, we need to be together, we need to help each other. The Ayn Rand is anathema. Funny enough, is anathema to this whole concept. Ego, what the Buddhists would call self-cherishing, the little self, in that is the shadow, the persona. It's one big complex, and the manifestation of ego usually is judgment and desirous attachment. Now, this starts to differ a bit from the yoga scriptures that I studied early on, and I must say I had difficulty with, and I thought, I have a problem because I'm never going to be a yogi. The dark side of our nature must be properly confronted, neither dismissed nor conquered, but acknowledged for what it is, even valued as such. Like I said, nobody would be in this audience if we didn't have a strong ego, and we wouldn't be living in Santa Barbara either. Remember that good prevails by being what it is, not by dispossessing, defeating, or winning, but rather simply by being more and more of what it is. If you want to get rid of the dark, replace it with light, love, laughter. Don't try and push it away. What you resist will persist. What you destroy destroys you. What you defeat defeats you. What you sanctify sanctifies you. So acknowledge it, but keep it on the back burner. Ego, judgment, you see it there and you say, hey, no, just stay where you are. The idea is to subordinate the ego to the higher self, not to subordinate the higher self to the ego. But you can't get rid of ego. And Jung was one who said this, and the ancestors concur completely. One just has to control it. More about persona here. As fame can enslave, so can the costs of money impoverish. Make sure the need is worth the price. To overpay can rob the self. Got a little time for a little story. I hiked once with an African in the bush in Kruger National Park. talking about overpaying and robbing the self. And he was a Christian, but his mother was a Sangoma, and we were talking about witchcraft. And he said, anybody can become a witch. All you have to go to is go to a powerful witch, and he or she will sell you a snake. And he said, the trouble with a snake is that you have to feed your snake. And if you don't feed your snake, the snake will eat your family, it'll eat your children, it'll eat your wife. So you're a slave to your snake for the rest of your life. So that's taking it way, way out to the dark side. But somewhere in between there, we have to be careful we don't sell ourselves to the snake of samsara, of the material that's all pervasive all around us. And it's very subtle, because their commercials are brilliant. They make a car look like a peak experience. It's unreal. And you only have to look at some of those Apple presentations. I mean, they're so slick and they're so amazing, and the product, and you start to get I'm an Apple fan, but there's a shadow side to Apple that I think we have to acknowledge. The light of lights, the Great Spirit, looks always on the motive, not the deed. The shadow of shadows on the deed alone. So why are you doing this? What is the motive? So, we have people around who give huge donations. Why? Because they want to curry favor with the board so they can put up a big development and destroy the environment. That's bad motive, huge karmic consequence. We are accountable not only to each other and what we do to each other, but also to the still beings, the growing beings, and the wild beings. If we screw up the environment, we will be accountable. If we screw up, the growing beings, we have the same thing. The wild beings, there is no hierarchy. We're no better than a frog, in the eyes of the Great Spirit. So the motive is really key, not the deed. The shadow of shadows on the deed alone. But they also say ulterior motives are greatly underrated. So if you're getting a tax rebate for a donation, that's okay. Rather give the money than not. If your intention, though, is, hey, I really want to help this cause, where can I put my money that'll best help this cause, and then you get a tax break from it, that has no karmic implication. But if you speak to your accountant and says, hey, how can I get the best tax break, and your motive is to get a tax break, that has a karmic implication. But ulterior motives are still underrated. This is the most simple thing that I think I can always listen to for myself. All must be done for its own sake, not for reason of an outcome. All is a journey, not a destination, and it is a continual arriving. I remember once talking to a Buddhist teacher of mine about this, because I would say to him, if my whole point is that I'm doing this because I want to get enlightened, I'm not doing it for its own sake. He said, no, it's okay because you have the right, the right intention. Well, that's true, I think, to some extent, but I think enlightenment, self-realization is a very slippery term. I like the idea of a becoming. If you're doing something for its own sake all the time and you're just in the process of becoming more and more of who you are, you don't have a goal in mind. You just carry on doing it for its own sake. So it's always an easy thing to say, why am I doing this? Is it for its own sake? My spiritual practice, am I trying to really get good at this drum, or am I just drumming because I want to get in the zone? Until you empty yourselves of pride, God cannot be realized. Now, this is a vibrational thing again. One has to have an empty container for God to come in. It has to be empty of pride, of ego, of persona, of judgment, and of desire, as we'll see. This is even stronger. There's no room for God in him who is full of himself. The sages tell us concerning the proud man, God says, I and he cannot dwell together in the world. It's not a judgment, because it's just a consequence. Like all these things are not about good or bad, it's about consequences. Karma is about consequences, not about good or bad or judgment. I love this one. If a man be crossing a river and an empty boat collide with his own skiff, even though he be a bad-tempered man, he will not become very angry. So imagine it, you're in your thing and this thing collides with you and there's nobody in it. You're going to think, hey, this is a shame. What happened? Did he drown? Should I take it, try and find him and give it back to him? If the thing damages your own boat, you're going to say, well, I'm responsible. I didn't see it. But if he sees a man in the boat, he will shout at him to steer clear. If the shout is not heard, he will shout again and yet again and begin cursing. And all because there's someone in the boat. Yet if the boat were empty, he would not be shouting or be angry. If you can empty your boat crossing the river of the world, no one will oppose you. No one will seek to harm you. Now, there are not many people like this. You see it in indigenous people, the Bushmen. They've got an empty boat. That's why when you go and hang out with them, it's like, wow, What is it about these guys? They don't have a big sense of ego. They don't judge. This is, where I started with a lot of the work that I began. You see it in the Dalai Lama. I've never met him, but people who've met him say this. His boat is empty, and you can feel it. I actually once took a group from Noetic Sciences on a trip to the Kalahari to visit the Bushmen. And it was the most disastrous trip that I did logistically, but the most successful one I ever did spiritually. Why? Because I didn't do anything. We sort of mimicked the Bushman archetype, which is a completely egalitarian society. Of course, there were people who were arranging the trip and so on. Leadership was invisible, as it is amongst the Bushman community. But the reality was the floods in 2000, the game reserves were underwater, we couldn't go and see game. We never saw any game in the Kalahari, but we hung out with the Bushmen. We had the most amazing time because of this incredible group of people. Sadly, after that, Noetic Sciences, I thought, this is great, I'm going to do another trip. The next one was the complete opposite. It was the most incredibly amazing trip logistically, but the most disastrous one spiritually. So now I'm a little more selective about who I used to take on trips. I don't do them anymore. But this is what we had, a bunch of big players on this trip, very big spiritual players. One of them was a 3-star general. And he came to me at the end of the trip and he said, the key to spiritual power is not having power. Which I thought was pretty profound. He was right in there. So I've got a lot of respect for some of these army guys. If you look at some of the new developments coming to do with PTSD and everything, they're all coming through the army. So we shouldn't judge them too bad in the spiritual realm. Humility is truthful acknowledgement of the wonders of yourself. It is taking appropriate credit for your part while recognizing God's gifts to you. Humility rejoices and is grateful. Frequently I have people who come for a divination and I say, well, what are you doing? And they say, well, I'm a teacher. And I say, well, why aren't you doing healing? Because the ancestor says you're a healer. And they say, well, it's funny you say that because I've been told that before by psychics and people that I sometimes touch. And then you start to question them, and they clearly are the healer archetype, but they're doing the teacher archetype. But somehow they can't come to grips with the fact that they have this gift. So they invalidate themselves, they diminish themselves. We have to just realize that, we need to get out of the way of the gift we've got. It's not about us at the end of the day. Same is true for music, Sometimes I have somebody who comes along and, he's an engineer, and I say, well, they're not happy with what you're doing. And I said, what do you want to do when you were a teenager? I said, I was a good guitar player. I always wanted to play music. And my dad said, no, you'll never mount to anything if you're a musician, or they wanted to do art or whatever. So doesn't mean that you give up your day job, but then you've got to go and do whatever you can do to the best of your ability without any attachment to outcome or result, because that's what your gift is, and you won't be judged by any results. You'll only be judged by your effort and your passion. The challenge is relief from ego. Now this is more the ancestors here. I'm going to contrast it with the yoga scriptures. The challenge is relief from ego, how to be free from its tyranny. The way is relief from ego, surrendering and releasing one's instinct for protection, because ego is a protective mechanism, and cultural conditioning. Subduing its tyranny, but with respectful and grateful acknowledgement for its appropriate worth, not getting rid of it. The prize, the place of arrival, is relief from ego and a true sense of the pleasure of its place. Like, keep it over there in the back burner. I think that's all we're expected to do, not to get rid of it. Now, this is more the yoga concept. Behind my work was ambition. Behind my love was personality. Behind my purity was fear. Behind my guidance, the thirst for power. Now they are vanishing and I drift. I come, Mother, I come in your warm bosom, floating wherever you take me, in the voiceless, in the strange, in the wonderland. I come a spectator. And he says here, no more an actor. Well, I've had peak experiences, and, I've had them especially in nature, and I've had wondrous experiences in the jungle with the help of entheogens, mind-altering substances with shamans. And you're out of it, there is this no duality, but eventually you come back to yourself, and ego is still there. So I began to think I was hopeless. I didn't have any hope. Until I started to read some other things and heard from the ancestors I'm not saying this isn't true for yogis and people of Eastern tradition, but we have to be cognizant of our own cultural condition. And we're not yogis, we're not Buddhists. We don't maybe appreciate emptiness the way a Buddhist will unless we're completely immersed in it. Just like I can't be a hunter-gatherer, even if I was to go into the Kalahari and spend several years. I just don't have that conditioning. Here's another one. In the samadhi that comes at the end of reasoning and discrimination, no such thing as I exists because it is extremely difficult to attain. As I consciousness lingers so persistently, this is why man is born again and again. Well, I'm thinking, I'm going to be born again and again forever because I have I consciousness. I can't get rid of it. But you don't have to get rid of it, and I find this very reassuring. You just have to be sure it's not dominating you. It's not that you're subordinating it. Now, these yogis actually, when you think about them and some of their concepts, and we're going to have a break soon, their concepts of the causal realm and going to the causal realm in death, they kind of sound boring. They talk about moksha, liberation, that you're free and you dream and you're in bliss, and there's no masculine or feminine, no mind, body, or ego, no this nor that. In fact, you can't describe it. It's netty. It's not that. It's nothing. To me, that doesn't sound like a lot of fun, to be in this sort of empty space with nothing. All I know is that some of my ancestors are hanging out in the causal realm. They may not be yogis, and maybe that's a much higher vibration, but they're working their butts off, trying to get words to me and Mary Ellen, who's channeled a lot of this stuff, because they know we need help. Good. Well, let's start about desirous attachment and impermanence. You can't really separate these two. The Tibetan Buddhists, they do this amazing sand mandala, which they then go and destroy, just to show that nothing is permanent, nothing lasts. We're all basically carbon atoms. We'll return to that eventually. And the Buddhists say of all the meditations, the one on death is the most powerful one, because really the death meditation can get your attention because it just realizes you can't take it with you. And anything that you attach to in this lifetime actually impedes your progress. So impermanence is part of this, because when we have desire, there's nothing wrong with desire. But when we attach to the object of the desire, that's a problem, Nothing wrong with having a Mercedes, but if we become the Mercedes, that's a problem. And as I say, the media are so good at tempting us and making us go in different directions. Sometimes we are sort of manipulated without us even knowing it. It's from the ancestors, keep to the source of living waters. Again, water comes in here. Interestingly enough, that one of the parts of initiation as a Sangoma is to go and meet the water spirit. Without it connecting with the water spirit, which I guess is that sphira that you saw of wisdom, it's very hard to complete your initiation process. Do not think to store in cisterns, for they will break and crumble, and the water will be lost. Cup your hands and drink deeply and often, and you will have health and joy. So seize the moment. It's the only thing we have. That's the power of the spiritual practice. Don't accumulate stuff. It's going to get in the way. One day the people came to the Master and asked, how can you be so happy in a world of such impermanence, where you cannot protect your loved ones from harm, illness, and death? The Master held up a glass and said, someone gave me this glass, and I really like it. It holds my water admirably and glistens in the sunlight. One day the wind may blow it off the shelf, or my elbow may knock it off the table. I know this glass is already broken, so I enjoy it incredibly. So it doesn't mean you shouldn't be enjoying everything that you have. Enjoy it, but don't be attached to it. It's funny, I often get a dream that has to do with a talk, so I'll just share one I had a few weeks ago, where I was in the dream and there was an absolutely exquisite woman who came into the dream time, and I couldn't get my eyes off her. I mean, she was absolutely stunning. And she looked at me in the dream and I kept saying, what's your problem? And I said, no, it's okay, I'm just looking at you like you're a beautiful painting. I don't want to own you. I just want to look at you. And then she was happy, So I think there are a lot of things we can do that way, where we can just essentially really enjoy the moment and not know that, once you try to own things, we have a problem. You cannot control results, only your actions. You cannot decide outcomes, only your choices. And why is that? The reason is because the world is so complicated these days. Each variable has free will. And the more variables there are, the more you're going to be impacted by other people's decisions, which are not going to, things are not going to turn out. So I can't give you the whole story, but very briefly, I ended up building a healing center on a series of dreams in South Africa. Because of dreams, I was being guided by the ancestors. And eventually I was guided after a few years to leave. So I thought, wow, all that work, and now I've got to leave. But when I look back on it, I realized I'd gotten what I wanted. The land was under claim, and if I would have made the wrong choice or taken the wrong action, I would probably be stuck with a piece of land which would be completely derelict by now in South Africa. Instead of which I actually got paid out for it, which was a miracle, and it's now a piece of land that's completely derelict. It's kind of like a Tibetan painting, it's completely destroyed. But at least I had it for the moment. It was fantastic. I learned a lot from it. And when it was time to leave, I left. But if you would have asked me ahead of time, would you have done all this if you knew that was going to happen, I probably would have said no. Sometimes it's best not to know, because you can't find out what the outcome is going to be. So it is best that you practice non-attachment to any concern related to outcome, which includes a spiritual concern if it's related to an outcome, like I was talking about. I want to be self-realized, as opposed to I'm just in this to hopefully make some progress. Different energy. Now, there's a difference between a non-attachment and detachment. Concerning detachment, one of its pairs leads to a lifeless world without enthusiasm or hope, a place of indifference where one could become ensnared in hidden traps of dejection and despair. Detachment is about dejection and despair, where one no longer cares to love or dares to trust. So in a sense, a detachment is hopelessness, it's resignation. There's nothing I can do about this. So in a sense, sometimes renunciation, when you think of it, becomes desperation, because you have no other option but to renounce. That's the benefit of ego. You have to have developed your ego in order to subordinate it. You can't make it too easy for yourself. You don't have an ego, it's much easier to subordinate it. So detachment is not the same as non-attachment. Abundance is not an achievement of the acquisitive, but rather a legacy of the perceptive, a realization of plenty, not an acquiring of more. So, if you go backpacking, which is the closest I can come to the Bushman model, and you recognize what are the laws of threes when you go into any sort of situation like that. Well, you can live 3 minutes without oxygen. You can live 3 days without water. You can live 3 weeks without food, more or less. And you can live about 30 days without human contact, about love, without community. Otherwise, you get to be a bit of a basket case. So that's really all we need. Our needs are very simple. We need food and water. We need a roof over our heads. We need wheels. We need a computer. We need to manage the current day situation. We need a smartphone, I would say. Maybe not, but some of us need it. And apart from that, the rest is all wanting. Of course, the media want us to buy stuff, because that's how it works. Acquiring of more doesn't make us happy. More possessions, more worry. More generosity, more peace. There's nothing wrong with possessions, only to being possessed by them. They clutter up our lives. Too much stuff in our homes and everything clutters us up. Every time I've gotten rid of stuff, went from a big house with 4 kids to a small house, I felt better. I gave away all my furniture to my kids, the stuff that they could take. I moved into the studio at the back. I felt better. Every time you get rid of stuff, you actually feel better. It's a paradox. It's not, acquiring of stuff doesn't help. Give up owning things and being somebody. Quit existing. Nice one. We are all climbing towards the summit of our heart's desires. Should the other climber steal your sack and your purse and wax fat on the one and heavy on the other, you should pity him. The climbing will be harder for his flesh, and the burden will make his way longer. More stuff, it's going to be harder. And should you in your leanness see his flesh puffing upward, help him in a step. It will add to your swiftness. I must say, since I'm not as young as I used to be, I've gone ultralight backpacking now because I take this very literally, you know. I don't want to be puffing up hills and all the rest of it. But it's a figurative thing, and if you help the other one, you know, don't pity him and say, hey, look how cool I am because my backpack's heavy, you know, nice and light and yours is heavy. You know, you improve your karmic brownie points by maybe taking some of his load. Wants, needs, and necessities have different characteristics. It is the want that is our enemy, not the need and the necessity. Greed is not stilled with money any more than thirst with salt water. You know, the more things we have, the more we want them. You know, you get the new iPhone, and then a year later, the other new iPhone's coming up. So do we really need the new iPhone? 99% of the stuff I have on my iPhone I can't use anyway. So, but the 1% that I do use is fantastic, you know. So, but if we get into that whole thing about wants, we never will be satisfied. So just in summary, it's all quite simple, but difficult. Awareness, truth, the present moment, love and empathy, and guard against desirous attachment, judgment, and ego, not because it's about wrong or right, or, you know, it's because it's a vibrational problem for the soul. Go with the heart rather than the head. So I'm going to do another meditation now. This is kind of interesting because sometimes the musician that I work with in South Africa, he sometimes channels while we're working, or he channels at night, and sometimes he channels in Hebrew. So I had to actually find out what this meant, but the word was Moach shalit al halev, which means the mind controls the heart. Doesn't mean that it should control the heart, it's to warn us that it should not control the heart. So this song is about that. I put the words to a song when I feel it's appropriate. So again, relax. Anything that's strained during your talk, sit up straight, breathe full, deep breaths, close your eyes, and let the music take you wherever you want to go, to any part of the talk or not the talk, anything that you want to focus in. This kind of different sensory meditation. Focus on one thing that'll take you somewhere.
Shalit al halev, Moach shalit al halev. The mind controls the heart. The mind controls Shalit Alev Moach Shalit Alev Laila the mind controls the mind. The mind controls
You can slowly open your eyes and move about. And when you're ready, we'll take some questions. How to deal with acute pain is the question. That's a really good question. You know, what we talked about last time, one of the things was that there have been studies, and I actually wanted to talk about this a little bit anyway, so thanks for raising it, in terms of how people are different. So what works for one person may not work for another. Somebody sort of brought that to my attention. We talked about how there were studies showing with functional MRIs that if you did an exercise with two groups of people, and the one group of people were told to deny and push the pain away, they measured how long they could stand their hand in a bucket of ice water. And the other group were told to go into the pain, experience the pain, be with the pain, and they found out that those people could actually last much longer with the pain than the ones that were trying to push it away. And they also found that people who could meditate, especially mindfulness meditation, they could even last much longer. They did it automatically, even though they weren't meditating at the time. But you can be sure that some of their skills would come to play. So I think for some of us, that would work, meditation. I know now that the Army is teaching people with PTSD to do mindfulness meditation with great success. So it's certainly working for some of them. When I talked about this last time, somebody sent me an email to say when she does that, she becomes the pain. And that's absolutely, reliable for her. So it may not work for everybody else. But that's the only thing that I can really tell you, other than the fact that some kind of meditative practice, Tai Chi, or something where you're working with your energy body, might be of use to you, but it's a tough one. Okay, bones. What basically is, the way I came into this was, again, I was talking because I thought I didn't have any abilities whatsoever. So eventually, after many messages from many Sangomas, I decided to get initiated, thinking that nothing was going to work for me. But I spent 2 years being initiated, and I found that what I was being taught actually worked for me. And the reason it worked was because one of the methods of connecting with the field is using the bones. Some people will trans-channel. In Africa, they call it possession, where they actually they leave their body, the spirit comes in and talks through them, and that was clearly not what my ancestors wanted for me, but they wanted me to learn the bones. So essentially you have ancestral spirits. In my case, I have one. It's a black woman who was a Sangoma, who was a Sangoma in a previous life, who didn't finish everything she was supposed to do karmically. So now she chose to use me to help her complete her karma. And of course, I can do the bones pretty well because I had that kind of aptitude. And essentially what happens when you throw the bones, you don't throw the bones, whether the client does them or I do them. The bones are thrown by a force field in a non-random readable fashion. And each bone has a different polarity. There's bones for every cosmology of the human condition, for your ancestors, for your home, for your money, for your children, for your significant other, for your health. There's a bone for each thing, usually animal bones and other articles. And depending on how they lie and how they lie in relation to each other or even in relation to the mat, you make a reading which is both intuitive and cognitive, because you need both, you know. But a lot of it is intuitive, and you essentially are just reading the dream that is the person's life that has been portrayed on the mat by the ancestor who throws the bones. So that's kind of what it's about. It's more about psycho-spiritual diagnosis than it is about physical diagnosis. I don't like to use it for that because we have better techniques. But sometimes it will point to a physical problem. You know, it'll say, hey, you know, you should get a checkup, or maybe there's something wrong with your heart. But they don't distinguish between dis-ease and disease. So the dis-ease might be an emotional thing in the heart rather than a physical thing. But the belief system is that eventually an emotional thing will become a physical thing if it's not corrected. So I don't know if that's enough information for you. Just another way of divination, but it's very sophisticated. But it's not that different to like pulling a tarot card or something like that. The first meditation that we did was what was called a sensory meditation. And I'm not that good at it, to tell you the truth. I'm not actually that good at any meditation. That's why I really go hiking and do yoga. But essentially the idea is to use some sort of sensory input to push you into a mindfulness state about the sensation that you are dealing with. So if you've got incense there, it sets up an environment that's already conducive to something happening, because the senses are so important for us. We are sensory beings. So by looking at a candle, by maybe eating a piece of chocolate, or just in a Zen way enjoying your breakfast and tasting every mouthful, that would be a sensory meditation. The Vipassana type meditation, where you go into your bodily sensations, is sensory meditation as well. But here the ancestors are really talking about using the senses to imagine, the wisdom thing, what it is you want to sort of go into. So, for instance, if you were to take one aspect of this talk that you really wanted to connect with, then, you'd play some music that's appropriate for you. This music may not be appropriate for everybody. You use some music to pull you into that space of the meditation, but the meditation is about imagining, fantasizing, what Einstein was talking about a certain thing, and then becoming part of the thing, one with the thing, as opposed to sensory withdrawal, which is more like the yoga concept or the Buddhist concept, is pratyahara, where you actually withdraw from the senses and go inwards. There's a saying I think it's from David, that says, from the sound of my sighing has my essence cleaved onto my flesh. And what that really means is that when you are in a sense of sighing, like this, that you have if you come out of yoga, or you come off a hike, or you've listened to a great piece of classical music, from the sound of that sighing, your essence, which is your spirit, your soul, comes together with your body, cleaves onto your flesh. And this is what we are. We're sentient beings. We're supposed to be enjoying all the senses, but enjoying them responsibly. There was a guy called Reb Nachman who said, joy is not incidental to the spiritual path. It's vital to the spiritual path. So the senses are a way of really enjoying it. So whether it's yoga or walking in the wilderness or whatever it is, that's when your essence cleaves onto your flesh. When you go on the backpack trip for 3 days, you are like a bushman almost, even though you can't master those skills. 5 days, even better. If you go on a retreat, similar kind of thing. And like we were talking, it may not be your path, but there are people here who may be having trouble with meditation who might want to check out this Hadya Raga. The interesting concept in the Kabbalistic sense is that when you assault your soul with the samsara of sensation, in other words, you enjoy things irresponsibly, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, the body distances itself from the soul. The soul is always part of God, but then you have this dissociation. You actually have a kind of a soul loss until such time as you bring them back together again with change in, spiritual practice or whatever it is. The huge thing is forgiveness. I can't stress how big that is.